Hello, I'm Gwen Hill from Pine Ridge Baptist Church Sunday School Department from the ladies class. We are studying the book of Exodus, and today we're looking at Exodus 27. We are on the mountain with Moses and God as God gives to Moses the plans for the tabernacle. What is the tabernacle? It's a tent-like structure that God has said he wanted it to be a meeting place between the Israelites and himself. He wanted to be with his people. So he is giving Moses the design that is a replica, excuse me, or a copy of something that is in heaven. And he keeps reiterating to Moses as he gives him these diagrams that he is to build it specifically like God says. Not, well, I think it'd be better if we did it this way or another way, to build it exactly as God says. I think that's very interesting as I go. You know, we have to approach God the way God wants us to. We are here and God is way up here. And if we're going to meet with God, we need to listen to how he wants us to come. We are not the arbiters here. God is. He's done so much for us, and he expects and deserves us to listen to him. In this chapter, we're going to look at the altar of burnt offering. That is the bronze structure that as soon as you come into the courtyard of the tabernacle compound, you will see the very first thing. And it behooves us to remember that we have to bring a sacrifice when we come to God. He's deserving of that. We are sinful creatures approaching a holy God, and we're going to find out today how the Israelites were told to build this altar. Remember, we've not built it yet. We are getting the instructions. And I told my class, I said, it makes me so anxious because I know me and I know my memory. And where I'm Moses, there would be several times on that mountain I would say, wait a minute, God, wait a minute. Let me repeat this back to you. Let me make sure I have this correctly, like you want it. I am so fallible. I'm glad Moses had this job. We're going to start Exodus 27. We're going to read 1 through 8 to start with. God is speaking. Build an altar of acacia wood, 3 cubits high. It is to be square, 5 cubits long, 5 cubits wide. Make a horn at each of the 4 corners so that the horns in the altar are all of one piece, and overlay the altar with bronze. Make all its utensils of bronze, its pots to remove the ashes, its shovels, its sprinkling bowls, meat forks, and frying pans. Make a grating for it, a bronze network, and make a bronze ring at each of the 4 corners of the network. Excuse me. Put it under the ledge of the altar so that it is halfway up the altar. Make poles of acacia wood for the altar and overlay them with bronze. The poles are to be inserted into the ring so that they will be on 2 sides of the altar when it is carried. Make the altar hollow, out of boards. It is to be made just as you were shown on the mountain. Okay, acacia wood. We've talked about acacia wood for 2 or 3 weeks now. Acacia wood is in the Bible another way of saying the shittim wood. Okay. It is a very, very hard wood. It is not a big tree. It just barely would escape the definition of shrub. It is a very thick, trunked, short tree. It is, when they cut it down, it has a lot of reds and yellow. And as it cures, the yellow turns more red. It's a beautiful wood, a very hard wood. This acacia wood, this altar is hollow. It if you built a fire in the open on the ground, you would have to continually work to contain that fire and make sure that it stayed exactly where you want it. So this is a container, an open-ended, both ends, that they put over, that they built the fire within. Think of your barbecue. And the bottom is open, it's against the ground or the sand, and the sides come up, and halfway up those sides, that's where the grate would be. That's where the animal's carcass would be placed, on that grate. So it says it's to be square, a horn on each corner. Horn, anytime you see horn in the Bible, it speaks of God's power. Okay, horn on each corner, and it's 7.5 foot wide, 7.5 foot long, and it's 4.5 foot tall. So these protrusions, these horns, would be an extra, however long the horns were. Pictures I've seen that they're usually less than a foot long, and they're kind of curved, kind of like an animal's horn, one single horn going out. And they're making them of bronze. We're finding out that the acacia wood is then overlaid with bronze. Why would they choose bronze? There's two good reasons why they would choose bronze. The first one is, in the Bible, bronze stands for judgment, for justice, for judgment. The second is, bronze can withstand great high heat. So these wooden boards that are encased with bronze, the wood wouldn't be burned. Okay, why is he not choosing silver or gold for this altar? Well, the ceremonial meaning doesn't match, and plus, as hot as those coals would be, it would melt the gold and the silver. It says make the utensils. Why do they have to have utensils? The utensils is for cleaning out the ashes so that the fire builds better. Have you ever worked with a fireplace or a campfire, or my husband gets out there and plays in wood piles that he burns on our little farm, and it has a lot of ashes, and he keeps working those ashes with his tractor to contain them and to make sure the fire burns well. So taking care of the ashes, moving the ashes out, moving the clinkers out, if you would. Meat forks, yep, the sacrifice that the forks are for is for the turning of the meat, because remember, not every sacrifice, there's so many different sacrifices, and we're going to study that more when we get into Leviticus, but when you're doing meat sacrifices, half the carcass, if it's not for the sin offering, half the carcass is you're going to take home with you. That is not cooked. The half of the carcass that is cooked goes home with the priest. It is the meat part of the carcass. And so they are making a grating for it, and then those forks are to turn that meat. Think of barbecue again, okay? The part that is burnt till it's consumed with the fire is the fat, the liver, I don't know if the kidneys are or not. That's what I'm thinking. The heart. Those pieces are choice pieces, and those are burned, consumed by the fire. That is the offering. And then the other part, half of it goes back to the person who was offering it, and the other part goes with the priest when we're talking about the big offerings. Make a grating for it. That's a grating, so that when you're cooking on top, when you're sacrificing on top of it, any meat, anything that falls through, that's what you want it to do. Or if you're doing an offering where it means the whole offering is consumed, then you would keep burning it and keep turning it till it was nothing but cinders and fell through. Everything that we're making in the tabernacle has to be portable, because every time they move, they take down the tabernacle, they move, and then they place it, they re-erect the tabernacle. And so everything has to be able to be moved. If you're going to move a 7.5-foot square box, you have to have some way to lift it and some way to move, because there's quite a bit of weight there. And so you have 2 big long poles that men would carry the altar from one place to another. And I've already told you that it was hollow and how it was made. And then God ends verse 8 with that phrase I spoke at the very beginning and said, just as you were shown on the mountain. If we're going to do things to make God proud of us, happy with us, we have to do it His way. We can't argue with God. We see here. God sees way. He sees the beginning and the end. We see now. So we don't need to argue with Him or fight with Him. He knows the answers. 19. This is talking about, remember, God is giving these instructions, these diagrams and things from the inside out. And I told you that when they opened the curtain and they first went into the courtyard, the first thing they saw was this bronze altar. Well, now we're coming out from that, and the Lord is giving instructions for how to contain the courtyard. It is a beautiful description that He's giving of a white linen fence. Number 9 and following. Make the courtyard for the tabernacle. The south side shall be 100 cubits long, and it is to have curtains of finely twisted linen. 100 cubits, that is like 150 feet, half a football field. And that south side is to have 20 posts and 20 bronze bases with silver hooks and bands on the post. The north side shall be 100 cubits long and is to have curtains with 20 posts, 20 bronze bases, and silver hooks and bands. In other words, it's a mirror. It's the same thing. Then the west side is of this curtain fence would be behind the Holy of Holies. The west end of the courtyard would be 50 feet wide and have curtains with 10 posts and 10 bases. And on the east side, toward the sunrise, the entrance into the tabernacle compound, too. On the east side, toward the sunrise, the courtyard shall also be 50 cubits wide. Curtains 15 cubits long are to be on one side of the entrance, and 3 posts and 3 bases. And curtains of 15 cubits long are to be on the other side with 3 posts and 3 bases. For the entrance to the courtyard, provide a curtain 20 cubits long of blue and purple and scarlet yarn and finely twisted linen, the work of an embroiderer with 4 posts and 4 bases. All of the posts around the courtyard are to have silver bands and hooks and bronze bases. The courtyard shall be 100 cubits long and 50 cubits wide, with curtains of finely twisted linen 5 cubits high and with bronze bases. All the other articles used in the service of the tabernacle, whatever their function, including all of the tent pegs for it and for those in the courtyard, are to be of bronze. Picture this. These curtains are very embroidered white linen. Have you ever had a blouse, a shirt made out of linen where they used the same color, but maybe they made it in a banding and a little different weave to give you an idea of what it looked like? This is almost like a checkered. It's white on white linen, and it's just the way that it's woven that you get the checker in it. And this is 7.5 foot tall, and the poles that hold it up have got on the very bottom bronze. That's judgment, right? Then they have the post, and the post is acacia wood that is covered over with bronze. And the curtain attaches to it. Kind of think like your shower curtain. It attaches to the top, okay? Those poles are fairly close together, and they have hooks at the top, and the hooks are made of silver. Silver is for redemption. We think of silver in this instance as redemption. And then we go. That goes all the way around the courtyard. Goes all the way around the courtyard. The tabernacle itself is inside this enclosure. This enclosure is 7.5 foot tall. The bronze altar that we just looked at was 7.5 foot tall. So if you were outside, most people aren't 7.5 foot tall, and there weren't little hills. They were on ground, desert ground, and they would look, and they could see some things going on, because the priest would go up on a little mound of dirt that they made a little incline so that it would be easier for him to handle the sacrifice. They would see the upper part of his chest and his head, but they didn't really know what he was doing. They could see how tall was the holy place and the Holy of Holies, the actual tabernacle. Do you remember how tall it was? 15 feet. So from a distance, if you were looking at that white wall that was 7.5 foot tall, you could still see the top of the tabernacle proper. It wouldn't be very beautiful to look at. It would be very plain. It would look like a Bedouin's tent. It would be a dark surface top, brown, gray, black, somewhere along that line, totally plain looking to you. Just like we are told in Isaiah that Jesus, the Messiah, would not be physically appealing to us as to draw us to him. But the treasure that is inside the tabernacle, the same treasure that was found inside Christ, the living God. We would have the silver band would go around those posts as a decorative, because this is supposed to be a beautiful place. And this would be beautiful. So we had that. We have the courtyard. Now as we talk about the inside of the tabernacle. The inside of the tabernacle, do you remember it had the lampstand? We call it the menorah. It is, we're not told how tall it is, but it's the only light provider in the whole tabernacle, with the exception of when you went into the Holy of Holies. The holy place, this was all the light. It would have been like a dark cave in there. And the menorah stood on one side, and the showbread table sat on the other. And the menorah was fashioned in such a way that its light would project light into the room. And they God wanted that light, that oil lamp, that lampstand, to be kept burning at all times. And because the inside of the tabernacle, if you looked up, you saw beautiful tapestry, and it had depiction of cherubim and beautiful coloring work done there. You wouldn't want that to get all sooty and all that kind of stuff. You wouldn't want a lot of smoke. If you have olive oil that is very, very pure, there's very little smoke, if any. And they also went in every day, the priests did, Aaron's sons, or were to, we will find out. They are to go in every day and make sure that the wicks are correct, that there's enough oil, that everything's running right. The showbread. I told my class this week, I said, I have saw so many depictions of the showbread and how the bread, there was a loaf for each tribe on that table. And I had seen it stacked, 2 stacks, 6 to a stack. But I read in Leviticus, that's not the way it's supposed to be. It's laid out in rows, 6 on one row, 6 on the other. Had you ever thought that just like Jesus told us that he came for everyone, that those showbread loaves that represent each tribe, the biggest tribe didn't have the biggest loaf. The smallest tribe didn't have the smallest loaf. The loaves were uniform in size and the same. Where we stand in our culture, where we stand in man's eyes, is not what God looks at. He loves us all alike. I thought that was pretty neat inference when I read it this week as I was studying for this class. So God is addressing the oil. And I want you to notice something else in verse 20 when I read it here in just a minute. When God said he wanted to build this tabernacle, he told Moses, he said, now Moses, I want them to give with a free heart. I will only want you to take offerings from those people who want to give. This is to be an offering of appreciation, of thanksgiving, and of love. We'll find out later that they gave abundantly, so much that Moses had to tell them, I've got enough, don't give any more. But look at the first word in verse 20. Chapter 27, verse 20. Command the Israelites to bring you clear oil of pressed olives for the light, so that the lamps may be kept burning. In the tent of meeting, outside the curtain that shields the ark of the covenant law, Aaron and his sons are to keep the lamps burning before the Lord from evening till morning. This is to be a lasting ordinance among the Israelites for the generations to come. You know, when you make a commitment to the Lord, he expects you to honor your word. He expects us to do the things that would draw us closer, even closer to him. And one of the things, they all were in agreement to build the tabernacle, or they would have never brought all of that, those offerings. And he is telling them here, there's consequences. The menorah has to be kept. So this is a lasting commandment. You have to also remember that you're going to supply the oil to keep the lamps lit, and not just any oil, not any, in today's language, not any canola oil or soybean oil or vegetable oil, Crisco, Western oil, none of that stuff. I want pure olive oil. That's what I want. And I love that God called it in 21 the tent of meeting. That was the whole purpose of it. He wants to be with his people. He is preparing the Israelites and everyone around him. He's telling them what Jesus is going to do. Jesus is going to come because he wants to be with us. God is building this tabernacle because he wanted to be with these people. Do you know what you are? If you know Jesus Christ and have accepted him as your Savior, did you know you're a tabernacle? This earthly body is temporary. And God is sitting on the throne of your heart. The Holy Ghost. And this tabernacle is a picture of that. It's a picture of how God can be with them then. And it's representative of what God is going to do through Jesus Christ later. And then through eternity. So now we've got the tabernacle plans completed. We have the tabernacle, the plans for building the Holy of Holies, the holy place, the ark, all of the accoutrements that are inside, with the exception of two things. We don't have the altar of incense that's listed here yet, but we'll get to that. And we don't have the laver mentioned here, but we'll get to that. those things are left out of these plans this go round. Next week, we're going to be talking about the clothing for the high priest. Wow, was he decked out. I'll see you next week. I hope you have a good week. May God bless.